was the significance of 1789? The Constitution. So basically the next decade is the first decade under our government, which we would have in 1789, George Washington become president, was president for 8 years. Most of that decade then, we would have a Federalist as president. Even though Washington officially wasn't, he was. He was pretty much a Federalist. No. Or actually, I'll probably just do that the one page of it, which will be quick for most of it. He's elected in 1789. How many votes did he have against him in the Electoral College?
0.
Right, he's unanimous. Oh, but what about his re-election campaign? He has a tough re-election, doesn't he?
Yeah.
No, he's unanimously elected again. Okay, officially not in any party, but lean Federalist. You'll see he's even listed as a Federalist. When we have our president's quizzes later on, if you put him as no party, it's right. If you put him as Federalist, it's right. There, but just know what that. Biggest event was the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay, do we need to go over that again?
How many people were in the Electoral College back then?
Well, you had it where you had the number of representatives. Each state, you get the number of representatives from your state plus the number of senators. So it wasn't a huge number at that time. I don't know offhand the exact number. And then as states added, because we used to not have it capped at 435 for House of Representatives. All right, 2 treaties you must know. Okay, and this is where for diplomatic side, one thing that I'll say is that I am sometimes weak on is I don't go as deep into diplomatic side as I should. I go more in the economics, I do some of the political, I actually will end up with social in other ways. But Jay's treaty, first of all, when you have a treaty, who is Jay's treaty with?
Britain.
All right, it is with Britain, so you need to know that. Now, what is it about? It's a variety of things. We had some problems with the Treaty of Paris when we ended the Revolutionary War. Our major problem was what we said we were going to do with the Loyalists, we didn't do. We said if the Loyalists own land, we were going to let them keep their land. But a lot of places, we took away their land. You didn't support our government, it's gone. So if we didn't uphold our side of the treaty, guess what Britain does? Yeah, they don't uphold theirs. And we told them to get rid of some of the forts in the Northwest Territory, and they didn't. So we kind of work out some of the problems. We don't work them all out, though. We won't eventually work out all our problems with Britain until we fight them again in the War of 1812. But this does take care of some of the smaller problems. But that's where Jay's treaty, it is with Britain. And again, Northwest Territory would actually be one of the biggest things. Problems that we had that we didn't uphold the Loyalist claims. Now, Pinckney's treaty. For some reason, this is the one that everyone keeps to forget about because we always think it's either Britain or France, except for Pinckney's treaty is with who? All right, this one is with Spain. Now, what this is about is New Orleans. We own the land all the way up to the Mississippi River, except for the very bottom of it. So if you see what today is Mississippi, we don't own this little part on the very bottom and down to that area. So if you went down the Mississippi River, we couldn't go to the last bit to get things out. Well, we need that. That is our main transportation that we have for our products to get out of the Mississippi River. So we had to work a treaty out with Spain in order to be able to go through New Orleans and then thus basically make our western lands more valuable. It also took care of the problem on what is West Florida, which includes some of what is the Panhandle, but mainly what's the bottom of Alabama and Mississippi today. But the area, because Florida used to go all the way to the Mississippi River. And so we claimed some areas, Spain was saying, so we worked out that. Now, it took care of a problem that we had at that time, but one problem that we were going to have, and this is where we looking ahead a little bit. A couple of years after we would have this treaty with Spain, they would no longer own New Orleans. France would. And you're going to see where Napoleon comes into history for us here in America. So Pinckney's treaty, when France took over, didn't matter anymore. We had to work then a treaty with New Orleans. And what ultimately would that treaty be? Yeah, the Louisiana Purchase there, which most of you know the Louisiana Purchase from 5th grade. Okay, you need to know the Pinckney's Treaty before that. It was only important for a couple of years, but you got to know it. All right, we have other foreign problems. Guess who's fighting yet another war? Yeah, France and Britain. Believe it or not, they're fighting yet again. France then tells us, hey, remember the Treaty of Alliance in 1788 or 1778? France came to our aid. So what should we do now? Yeah. So France said, you signed the Franco-American Alliance. What does George Washington say?
Nope.
Yeah. He says, wait, no, that was that war. Okay, even though we didn't say it was just for that war, that's right. And he then issues the neutrality proclamation. What does it mean when you're neutral? You're not on either side. So, we're not fighting on Britain's side, but we're not fighting on France's side either. And this is actually, when we look back, one of the wisest things that George Washington did. He did a lot of wise things. When they were fighting there, even though they did things, and if you look at for America, we used France a lot in the beginning. Okay, we really did. So, yeah, well, we didn't even, they weren't even a rebound girlfriend. Okay, we just kind of, we went out with them some at night. So. But this is where for the neutrality proclamation, we would claim to be neutral. We wouldn't fight on either side. Then we would have another crisis with France. I kind of throw this in here, but Citizen Guinée. This was a French citizen, was in the United States, and to make a really long story short, he tried to trick us and make it look like Britain was doing something to us and try to trick us to declare war on Britain. Then we found out that he's trying to trick us. So some of the Federalists that wanted to be on Britain's side, they said, well, let's go to war with France. So now Washington leaned Federalist. Is he going to go to war against France on Britain's side? No. What does he do? Yeah, he stays neutral. And to make the long story short for Citizen Guinée, he actually, the government he was working for got overthrown during that time, and he ended up living the rest of his life in the United States. Okay, I mean, it's just, but this is where the main thing you want to see, when problems are happening between Britain and France, what does Washington do? Yeah, stay neutral.
Yeah. What would have happened if like a U.S. merchant ship traveled down through Spain or France? Would they like shoot it?
Well, and this is the part that's what we had to work on. We were trading with them. We didn't. They technically we were going onto their land. If they wanted to charge us, basically like a toll or a tariff or anything else for what we have our products going through, they could have. So that's why we had to work out that treaty, because we were going through their pocket. All right, early growth of the United States is kind of thrown in. We have our first census in 1789. Why do we have a census? So we know how many people, and that's the key word that some of y'all didn't have. So we know for the representatives. Our new states, we use the Northwest Ordinance. So even though we make a new government, we're using the rules from the Northwest Ordinance. And you do not have to know these states, for some of you that have the quarters, the 14th, 15th, and 16th quarters, or Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Now, Vermont comes about because both New York and New Hampshire claimed that territory. And we ended up, for Vermont, instead of saying, okay, you belong to New York and you belong to New Hampshire, we just made another state. And part of this problem, Britain was also coming down to Vermont and trying to get them to break away and make their own nation. Kentucky and Tennessee, they joined in the West. Now, if you remember, when we go back to the political parties, the power of the Federalist is in the North. So for Vermont, this is a Federalist state. But the power for the Democratic Republicans is the South and the West. Democratic Republican, Democratic Republican. So where is most of our growth going for what political party? Yeah, the South and the West. So if you're the Federalist, you see your power is going away during this time. Okay. Now I have on here, what about the state of Franklin? Here's trivia. Where is the state of Franklin?
It's right next to
Pennsylvania.
Right next to Massachusetts.
It's right here.
That's right.
And at one time, they tried to make a state of Franklin. The people that lived here did not want to be part of North Carolina. They didn't want to be part of Tennessee. They actually were doing the application for statehood. They ended up not becoming a state. It is part of Tennessee. But if you're in this area of the mountains, you'll see some signs that sometimes will have State of Franklin on it. You actually have the State of Franklin Bank. That is the biggest bank in that area of the mountains there in eastern Tennessee. But that is what was going to be the state of Franklin. It never came about, but it could have easily been one of our states. All right, George Washington, he after one of the smartest things that he did, or we can look back and see, is after 2 terms he says, I'm done. And he decides to resign. Did he have to? No. There's no rule. He set that as a precedent. And this is where the idea that we want you to realize is that for the entangling alliances, we were in a different situation today than what we were at that time, as we are now leading power in the world, where at that time we weren't. Apart from the political parties, you almost have to look and say that, well, he was wrong. Well, he was right in one way. He said we'd have a civil war, but he said it would be because of political parties. But even though we might have Republicans and Democrats today that don't get along, I don't think we're at a point that they're going to go and kill each other over things. At least I hope not. Most of them. All right, our first real election. Again, our first election was with Washington. We knew who was going to win.
Who were the other people? Oh, was he unopposed?
Well, pretty much. Officially, John Adams, not John Quincy Adams. John Adams was also running, but it wasn't running against him. I mean, it was one of those things. They wrote the Constitution with George Washington in mind. They think we've got to get through the next 5-10 years because the nation at that time looked like we were going to teeter. So George Washington says he's going to step down. In the video, that their thesis statement said that might have been his greatest thing that he did, the greatest precedent that he had was to step down after 2 terms. So we then have an election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. The 2 men respected each other but did not like each other.
Really?
Okay, they are people that oppose each other's ideas there. And it would almost become a hatred there. I mean, it's one of those things that we, as nasty as our campaigns are today, they really aren't as bad as they were in those days because it was personal. Right? We now let other people say the nasty stuff about it. All right? They would say each other. And with the different groups, the presidents didn't actually go out and campaign. They let other people campaign for them. And on both sides, you had people that were saying various things. In New England, they're going around saying that Jefferson is the devil. Okay, and that if you vote for him, which of course we have the same thing. People say that about Obama today. Okay, if you vote for Obama there, I mean, it's voting for the Antichrist. You have people that are extremists with that. Meanwhile, Jefferson, they had people going about Adams, that he is just this elitist, and if you're a normal person, then he's going to take away all of your power. Okay, and he's just going to have it where a few rich people. Actually, that sounds a lot like today's election that we have. But it was our first one. The Federalist candidate is John Adams. The Democratic Republican is Thomas Jefferson. It is a very close vote. It is by 3 electoral votes. Now, you're going to see these maps for each of these elections that we have. And later on, you're going to see it's usually red or blue. Red for Republicans, blue for Democrats. We don't really have it at that time. The green are the states that Jefferson won. Remember, we're kind of going to the difference between Democratic Republicans and Federalists. You can see where their strength is. Democratic Republicans in the South and the West. The Federalists, the North and the East. And that's where their strength were. But our new space and our new growth is out west, which is showing that for the future, the Democratic Republicans have gained. But there's another group that we also have that are joining the Democratic Republic. Now, Adams wins, Jefferson becomes the vice president. Why? Yeah. Our Constitution said second place becomes vice president.
That's kind of sad.
Which, again, we did not have political parties when we wrote the Constitution. So we had a problem here. Now, if you are John Adams and you really don't like Jefferson's ideas, do you even have to talk to him?
No.
No.
In the Constitution, what powers are actually given to the vice president?
Take over.
Isn't he a
Nine.
tiebreaker?
You're a tiebreaker in the Senate. If there's a vote, that's the one real power you have. Okay, if there's ever a tie in the Senate, you're a tie-breaking vote. You are officially the president of the Senate, which now we have a president pro tempore take care of that. And other than that, if the president can't do their duties, you were to assume the duties. We weren't even sure in the beginning, does that mean you're president or not? That's where when our first vice president, John Tyler, he says, I am the president. And they didn't respect him that way, but he set the precedent that if a vice president takes over, they do become president, not just assume the duties. But that's where we're at. There's nothing else. You don't have to listen to him. You don't have to do anything with him. And for Jefferson, I mean, one of the most brilliant minds, guess what he did during that 4 years?
Ignored him. Oh wait, no.
Nothing.
Basically
Snap back
nothing.
one split.
Yeah, he did basically absolutely nothing because Adams and the Federalists aren't going to give him anything to do. He's not a senator. He's not a representative. He's not governor of his state. He's vice president. Yeah.
Is it the same John Adams that was in the?
Yes, and the same Thomas Jefferson.
I was just making sure.
And they both
there's
would end
another
up
one.
dying, as you'll see with the trivial
Wait, I
thing.
thought
They
Tom-
both would end up dying on July 4th, 50 years after the writing of the Declaration of Independence, on the same day, 2 different states.
I thought that Adams and Jefferson liked each other.
No, they respected each other. They didn't like each other. Here's some of the difference that we have. And realistically, with a lot of our leaders that we have today, they do really respect each other. But some of they have to do is play a game for TV. All right, and if we were not have the extremists on there, a lot of times they would sit and work together. I mean, if we actually take the last election, McCain and Obama are a lot alike. All right, those two men probably would have worked great together. They actually would have made a great vice president president combo. They really weren't that extremely different in politics. And their commercial made it look like the two men couldn't stand each other, but they actually were not that different with each other. And they had respect for each other in a way. All right, I have on here, Washington said to be neutral. We're going to have problems. First of all, we're going to have a quasi-war. What is quasi? Not Quasimodo. What is quasi, though?
Mini skirmishes.
Well, it would be many skirmishes, but it's not like that. It's basically, here to make it real simple, it's a sort of war.
Sort of.
We're not officially at war with France, but we're sort of fighting them. Out in the Atlantic Ocean, we have some skirmishes with them. We're not actually fighting them, but we're not at peace with them. Remember, the Federalists supported Britain. So when Britain and France are fighting each other, we're kind of doing things, sort of helping out Britain, even though we weren't at war. Federalists are telling John Adams that he needs to push for war. Some of the Federalists in Congress are saying we need to declare war. But Adams was one, as Commander-in-Chief, saying, no, we're not going to do this. We would then have the XYZ affair with guess what country? France. I'm going to make this really simple for you. X, Y, and Z are just, when we wrote about this, instead of giving the names of the people, we just called them Agent X, Agent Y, and Agent Z. But what happened was we would go to the French Foreign Minister, Talleyrand, and we were wanting to speak with Talleyrand. And what was a custom in Europe at that time, not in America, but in Europe at that time, is if you wanted to go speak to someone, you basically paid them a little bribe, or they called it a tribute. So when you see the word tribute, think bribe. Which, when the story got out that when we want to talk to their foreign minister, which is like our Secretary of State, in order for us just to talk to them, we got to pay them money. We got to pay money to talk to somebody? No. And this is where, for a lot of Federalists, we are already having these skirmishes with the quasi-war. We have this. So they're saying, all right, perfect time to go to war. But what does Adams do?
He's neutral.
Yeah. All right. He basically, and Hamilton's one pushing for this, says to stay neutral. He follows Washington's advice. And here's where you see, even though we have these political parties forming, not everybody's always acting in the way of those political parties. All right, biggest thing that happens during John Adams' presidency in our country, they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. Alien in this case has to do with people from other countries, not other planets. Now, we have today illegal aliens and legal aliens. This is where we're dealing with legal aliens. Now, what does the word sedition mean? It's not rights. Sedition is basically speaking out against a country, sometimes even spying. So we pass laws dealing with immigrants from other countries and if you are speaking out against the country. There were multiple laws. We kind of put them in here together. See if you see some of that's happening. When most immigrants were coming from another country, they were joining the Democratic Republicans. So the Federalists are losing power as people are moving out west and joining more and more joining Democratic Republicans. Now people moving in from other countries are joining the Democratic Republicans. If you're the Federalist, do you see your power slipping away? And then people don't like to lose power. So what they end up doing, and here's where they did several different things. They changed the number of years to become a citizen. They moved it up to 14. So when a person moved to our country from another country legally, they would have to wait at least 14 years before they were allowed to vote. Because more likely they're going to vote to be Democratic Republican. They also made it where if there was any immigrants, it gave the president more power to deport them and kick them out of the country. The part for the Sedition Act, it made it illegal for you in a newspaper to write anything criticizing a government official.
Except freedom of speech.
What?
Well, and I say, what is this the
Freedom of
opposite
press.
of? What amendment? Yeah, the freedom of press. So this is where you're upset. Now, I have on here except for VP. Let's see, the vice president is Thomas Jefferson. In the actual law, they state you can't write against this person, this position, this position. But they never mention the vice president. So if you're a newspaper and you wanted to write about the evil Thomas Jefferson, you're perfectly legal to do that.
It's funny.
Of course, there's nothing political at all with this, right? Just happened to be for the safety of the country. Which, the other side, and these are where the Alien Sedition Act put arrows connecting them together, their response to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Jefferson and Madison would write these. We know that they write them today. At that time, we didn't. They were issued in front of the Virginia House and Kentucky House. What they said was that if a state doesn't like a federal law, they can nullify it. Basically, they can ignore it. And this idea of nullification would stick around. This is actually our first step that we have towards secession. You don't have to listen to a federal law. The U.S. government doesn't matter. Realistically, the Alien Sedition Act, it wasn't that, it looked like there could be some major problems, but what ended up happening is the election of 1800 kind of solved that problem. Which, in the election of 1800, we have the exact same two candidates. But who wins this one?
Jefferson.
Jefferson wins this time. Notice the difference is, basically New York is the big difference that you have in here. But Jefferson ends up winning in there. Not only did they win the presidency, wins the House and the Senate for the Democratic Republicans. But we have a revolution. We completely changed government and two branches. Not a shot is fired. And it kind of showed the peacefulness. Now, Adams was ticked off about this. It was very nice. And I'll actually go with the electoral mess. Well, let me go real quick through it. During this time, and I'll review over it tomorrow, and here, we would have a tie in the Electoral College. Aaron Burr, remember that name? Aaron Burr thought that he was supposed to be Jefferson's vice president. So we decided to make sure that we have for the parties that the Electoral College would cast 2 votes. But officially, if there is a tie or there is not a majority, it goes to the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives still was controlled by the Federalists until the new House would come in. Hamilton could have made it where Jefferson loses and Aaron Burr became president. But Hamilton doesn't like Aaron Burr. Remember later on we'll have, you already know about the shooting of that. But this is where Hamilton doesn't like Aaron Burr, and he respectfully knew Jefferson was one to win it, so that's why Jefferson would end up being it. Later we would make the 12th Amendment, which would change it, that would have the president and vice president run together, like what we have today. So we changed that rule. Now, what happened over in the Federalist? We'd have no more Federalist presidents, but we would have John Marshall, come in as a Chief Justice, and he'll make a great impression for 3 decades. Whig Party would come and adopt some of their ideas. The Republicans later on would adopt some of their ideas. Burr conspiracy, when we had the People reports, had about that, but John Marshall would actually acquit Aaron Burr of trying to have the park break away from it. And Aaron Burr ends up killing Alexander Hamilton in the next decade also.
It was completely legal?
Yeah, we'll talk about the things with the